"Pack your bags, you're not their mother anymore." My husband laughed as he replaced me with his mistress. So I knocked on his father's door. His dad handed me the keys to the family empire and whispered, "Marry me." The last thing I remember clearly before the fog took my life was the smell of fresh coffee on a Tuesday morning. That's it. That's the last clean memory I have of who I used to be. Standing in my own kitchen, Julian on my hip, Chloe pulling at my sleeve asking for the cereal with the yellow box, and the smell of coffee filling the whole room like a promise that the day would be ordinary and good, and mine. After that, everything blurs. Months of blur, then years. By the time Richard stood in our front doorway with another woman beside him and told me I was no longer my children's mother, I had been lost inside my own body for so long that part of me almost believed him. Almost. My name is Eleanor Sterling, and yes, I know how that sounds now. It didn't used to. I was Eleanor Marsh when I met Richard. 26, freshly promoted to senior analyst at a financial consulting firm in Boston, the kind of person who color-coded her grocery lists and read contracts before signing them and thought she was far too smart to be fooled by the obvious things. Richard was charming in the specific way that bypasses intelligence entirely and goes straight for something older and softer underneath. He was 40, broad-shouldered, with the kind of casual authority that comes from growing up in a family where authority was never in question. He laughed at all the right moments and listened, actually listened, in a way that felt rare enough to be remarkable. He was the heir to Sterling Vanguard, one of Boston's oldest private equity firms. His father, Harrison Sterling, had built it from one office and a handshake reputation over 40 years. Richard ran the day-to-day operations. Harrison, officially retired, retained 51% of the company's voting shares. I knew that detail when I married Richard. I did not understand then how important it would become. We married in October, in a ceremony at the family estate in Concord. It was beautiful. I remember being happy, which is the part that makes what came later so difficult to hold. The happiness was real. I was not imagining it. Whatever Richard was building in the background of our life together, in those first 2 years, I believe he hadn't started yet. Julian was born 14 months after the wedding. Chloe, 2 years later. I took a reduced role at the firm, my choice, made freely, with the plan to return full-time when both children were in school. Richard supported the decision. Richard supported everything in those early years. That was the trap. Support that teaches you to stop watching your back. The first sign came so quietly I almost missed it entirely. It was a Tuesday. Funny how Tuesdays keep appearing in this story. And I was sitting at the kitchen island trying to read a report my old colleague had forwarded. Something routine, numbers I'd read 100 times. I got halfway down the first page and realized I had no idea what I'd just read. I went back to the top, read it again. The words slid around like they were coded in something. I told myself I was tired. Julian had been up twice in the night with a cough. New mothers are tired. This was known. I made coffee, drank it, felt slightly better and forgot about it. 3 weeks later, I drove to the grocery store and sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes because I couldn't remember why I'd come. I told myself I was tired again. I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. Tired was the default setting. Around that time, Richard mentioned that he'd spoken to Dr. Aldous Carmichael, the family physician, 62 years old, round-faced, with an office in Back Bay that still used wood-paneled walls like it was 1987. He thinks you might have a B12 deficiency, Richard said one evening, setting a small white pill bottle on the nightstand, and some adrenal fatigue. He said these would help. I looked at the bottle. No prescription label, just small white capsules in unmarked packaging. Shouldn't I go in for blood work? I asked. He said it wasn't necessary at this stage. Just try these for a few months and see how you feel. I should have pushed. I didn't push. I was tired, and I trusted my husband, and the doctor was 62 years old with wood paneling, and I genuinely thought, that people who love you do not poison you. I was so wrong. The fog came gradually, which is what made it so disorienting to live inside. There was no single morning where I woke up and thought, something is wrong with me today. It was more like standing in a room that's losing light so slowly you don't notice until you're squinting. My short-term memory went first, not catastrophically, just the small things, names, appointments, the word I was reaching for. I started keeping lists, then lists of lists, then a calendar on my phone with reminders for things I'd previously never needed to be reminded of. I told myself this was motherhood. I told myself I was adjusting. Then the balance issues started. I'd reach for a glass and miss it by an inch. I'd walk down the hallway and catch myself on the wall. Once, in the school pickup line, I stumbled on a perfectly flat piece of pavement and the other mothers saw, and I saw the looks they exchanged, and something tightened in my chest that I couldn't name yet. Richard's response to all of it was consistent and loving. He drove me to appointments. He carried things when my hands weren't steady. He told the children Mommy was going through a tired time and that they needed to be gentle with her. He said it gently himself, in front of me, which at the time felt like tenderness. Later, I understood it was a performance. For the children, yes, but also for me, making sure I understood the narrative. I was fragile. I was unreliable. I needed managing. Dr. Carmichael saw me 3 times over the course of 2 years. Each time he adjusted the supplement slightly, a different dosage, he said. Each time I left, feeling vaguely reassured without actually feeling better. His notes, I would later discover, were kept separately from his main practice system, not filed under my name, not accessible through the patient portal. The year Chloe turned 5, I stopped being able to drive at night. The headlights of oncoming cars did something to my vision that I couldn't explain. I stopped going to evening events. I stopped seeing friends who didn't come come to the house. I stopped being Eleanor Marsh entirely and became instead a version of myself I didn't recognize, soft-edged and uncertain and dependent on a man who watched all of it with careful, loving eyes. That was the year Vanessa appeared. I found out about Vanessa the way women have always found out, eventually, despite everything designed to keep them from finding out. I saw a receipt. It was for a restaurant I'd never been to, on a night Richard had told me he was in New York. Not a hotel receipt, not a gift, just dinner for two at a place in Cambridge, mid-November. $347, including a wine I knew Richard only ordered when he was trying to impress someone. I sat with the receipt in my hand for a long time. Then I went to the bathroom and was sick. Then I came back out and put the receipt exactly where I'd found it, folded into the inner pocket of a blazer on the dry cleaning pile, and I didn't say a word. This was, I now understand, the moment I should have acted. Instead, I convinced myself I might be wrong. The fog had been affecting my memory. Perhaps I'd confused the dates. Perhaps there was an explanation. I was unreliable. Richard had been telling me so gently but consistently for years. Who was I to trust my own instincts when my own brain had been failing me? I said nothing. I waited. And while I waited, Richard continued building his case. I found out later, from his own written words, exactly what the plan had been. But let me tell you first what it looked like from the inside. 18 months after the receipt, Richard began mentioning, carefully and infrequently, that he was worried about me, not to me. To Julian's teacher, who mentioned it in a parent meeting with an expression of practiced concern. To our neighbors, the Aldersons, who started looking at me differently at the street barbecue that summer. To his mother, his parents were separated, his mother living in Connecticut, who called me one Sunday and said, with the particular cruelty of women who perform concern beautifully, "We just want what's best for the children, Eleanor." I didn't understand what I was watching being assembled. I should have. I was a financial analyst. I understood structure. I understood that individual pieces that seem unrelated often resolve at scale into a single coherent design. I missed it anyway, because the fog was still there, and because I still loved him, and because the hardest betrayals to recognize are the ones performed by people who hold your face gently in their hands while they dismantle you. The morning it ended, I woke to the sound of the front door, voices in the entry, Richard's, and a woman's, clear, confident, not lowered. I came down the stairs. Julian and Chloe were already at the breakfast table, cereal in front of them, watching the door with wide eyes. And there was Richard in the good suit he wore when he wanted to be taken seriously, standing next to a woman in a camel coat with perfect nails who looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they've already decided to replace. "Eleanor," Richard said. "Sit down." I didn't sit. "This is Vanessa. She's going to be living here." The world didn't tilt the way you'd expect. It went very still instead. "You're not stable," he said. His voice was kind. It was always kind, which was the most devastating part. "You haven't been well for a long time. The children need someone who can take care of them properly. And you need rest. Real rest. Not here." "I'm not leaving my children," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "You don't have a choice," he said. "I've already spoken to a solicitor. With your medical history, the cognitive issues, the balance problems, the dependency on medication, the courts will see what I see. A woman who isn't capable of being a mother right now. Dependency on medication." I heard the word, and something happened behind my eyes. Something cold and sharp and almost awake. "You mean the supplements you gave me?" He smiled, patient, practiced. "Eleanor, please don't make this harder. Pack your things," he said. "You're not their mother anymore." He didn't look at me when he said it. Julian was watching from the kitchen doorway, 7 years old, dark-eyed, wearing his school uniform with the collar slightly crooked the way it always was. He looked at me with an expression I will never be able to describe adequately. It was the look of a child trying to decide which thing he was supposed to feel. I did not cry. I went upstairs. I did not pack clothes. I packed Julian's dinosaur, the stuffed velociraptor he'd had since infancy and still slept with secretly. I packed Chloe's drawing notebook, the one she'd filled with horses and suns. I took my phone and my wallet and the small silver ring my grandmother had left me. Then I walked back downstairs, collected my children from the kitchen, told them we were going on an adventure, strapped them into the back of my Honda CR-V, and drove into the worst storm Boston had produced in 7 years. I had nowhere to go, except one place. Harrison Sterling opened the door at 12:23 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone as I stood on his porch, the rain coming down in sheets, Chloe asleep over my shoulder, and Julian pressed against my hip with his velociraptor clutched to his chest. I had driven 40 minutes to Concord in the kind of storm that closes highways, pulled into his driveway on instinct, and stood at the door for a full minute before knocking, because I didn't know what I was going to say. He opened the door before I knocked a second time. Harrison Sterling was 68 years old. He was a tall man, still straight-backed, with gray hair cropped close and eyes the color of deep water, the kind of eyes that have seen enough of the world to be neither easily surprised nor easily fooled. He had attended every school play Richard skipped, every birthday party Richard was traveling for. He had always looked at me, in the years of my marriage, with a particular expression. Not pity, not sympathy, but something more careful. Something that might have been watching. He took in my face, the rain soaking through my coat, the sleeping child on my shoulder, the 7-year-old gripping my side. He stepped back and opened the door wider. No questions, not yet. Just warmth and light and the sound of the storm becoming something you were safe from, rather than inside. He settled the children in the guest room with the steadiness of a man who had done this before, found a spare toothbrush for Julian, brought Chloe's shoes shoes in from the hallway, came back downstairs and made tea without asking whether I wanted it, setting it in front of me with the certainty of someone who has long since stopped asking unnecessary questions. I sat at his kitchen table and told him everything. Not in order. It came out in fragments, the way things do when you've been holding them alone for too long, and suddenly there is someone across from you who is actually listening. The fog, the supplements, the balance problems, the receipt, Vanessa, the solicitor. You're not their mother anymore. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the rain and the sound of the refrigerator. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me, Eleanor." I stared at him. "I own 51% of Sterling Vanguard," he said. His voice was level. This was not a romantic declaration. This was a briefing. "I own the company that Richard runs. I own, functionally, the financial position that allows him to maintain his lawyers and his pressure and his very comfortable life. If you marry me, the voting rights attach to the marital estate. You hold the leash." I understood what he was saying. "This isn't," I started. "No," he said. "It isn't. It's a declaration of war. I've been watching my son do this to you for 5 years. I did not move quickly enough. I'm moving now." The rain hit the windows hard. "I'll protect the children," he said. "Both of us will. That's the objective. Not romance, not revenge. Protection." He looked at me with those deep water eyes. "Say yes." I said yes. That same night, he pointed at the pill bottle I'd brought reflexively out of habit still in my coat pocket. "Flush them." But Richard always said, "Eleanor." His voice was quiet, but it had an edge underneath that I hadn't heard before. "Flush them. Now." I walked to the kitchen sink, opened the bottle, tipped it, watched the small white capsules disappear into the drain, ran the disposal. The grinding sound lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt like much longer. The next 48 hours were the worst of my life in a specific physical way. My head split open with pain that no amount of paracetamol touched. I sweated through 2 sets of sheets. I couldn't keep food down. Harrison's housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Park, who had worked for him for 19 years and who asked no questions and made excellent broth, appeared at intervals with things I could manage and disappeared again. On the second night, I lay on the guest bed convinced I was dying and thought, if I am dying, at least I'm dying without the fog. Because even through the pain, the fog was lifting, like a window being cleaned, section by section, things coming clear at the edges. On the third morning, I woke at 6:15 a.m., sat up without holding the headboard, walked to the bathroom and back without touching the wall, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen looking at Harrison sitting at the table with his newspaper, and the world was sharp. Completely, entirely, devastatingly sharp. He looked up. He smiled. Slow, sad, like someone who had been waiting a long time. "Welcome back," he said. I didn't feel gratitude. I felt furious. Real fury. The clean kind. Not the foggy, reactive kind I'd been living in for years. The kind that knows exactly what it's angry at and exactly what it intends to do. Harrison had been busy. While I slept off the withdrawal, he had made calls. His personal investigator, a man named Daniel Reyes, who had worked corporate security for 23 years before going private, had retrieved a lockbox from Richard's home office. Harrison had a key. He was still technically part owner of everything. He led me to the basement on the 4th morning. The lockbox sat on the concrete floor under the utility shelf. Brass corners, combination lock, the kind of unremarkable container that is easy to overlook because it's designed to be. Harrison stepped back. Let me open it. Inside, a manila folder. Pharmacy records printed on plain paper, no letterhead. Emails between 2 addresses I recognized as Richard's personal account and one I didn't. And a printed document, 3 pages, that appeared to be notes. In Richard's handwriting, supplemented by typed paragraphs. I read it standing on the concrete floor. Give it 18 months. The cumulative dose creates dependency consistent with benzodiazepine withdrawal patterns. Cognitive presentation will mirror early-stage dementia markers on standard assessment. Establish pattern of instability through social documentation, teacher contacts, neighbor observations, family concerns. By month 30, competency challenge is viable. Children remain with primary stable guardian. Marital estate resolves in standard no fault. Asset division reflects diminished capacity. He had written it like a project plan. He had done it to me like a project. My knees didn't buckle. I didn't drop the paper. I pressed my back against the concrete wall and breathed through my nose until the shaking in my hands slowed, and then I took photographs of every page on my phone. Then I called Dr. Sylvia Hart. Dr. Sylvia Hart was 41, a toxicologist at Boston General with a research specialty in pharmaceutical sedatives. She had testified in 17 criminal cases. She answered my call because Daniel Reyes, Harrison's investigator, had already spoken to her the previous evening. She met me at her office at 8 a.m. I brought the pharmacy records. She reviewed them in 12 minutes. "These are sedative compounds," she said without looking up, specifically a benzodiazepine derivative in microdose. Low enough not to register as unusual in a general health screen, high enough to produce cumulative central nervous system suppression over an extended period. The cognitive symptoms you described, the memory impairment, balance issues, word retrieval problems, they're textbook. Can you document it? I'd need a blood panel to confirm current metabolite presence. If you stopped 5 days ago, it'll still be detectable. She looked at me over the pharmacy records. And yes, Dr. Hart can document it. The blood draw was done that morning. Then I went to Dr. Carmichael's office. I didn't knock. I want to be clear about that. I walked to the front desk, told the receptionist my name, and when she said he was with a patient, I said, "Then he can finish with the patient in 60 seconds or I start talking in this waiting room." She made a phone call. Dr. Carmichael appeared from the back in 2 32 minutes. He was a small man. I had always thought of him as substantial. The wood paneling, the certificates, the professional calm. Standing in his own waiting room under fluorescent lights, he looked small. I showed him the pharmacy records. He went the color of old paper. "You prescribed these to my husband," I said, keeping my voice below the level of the 3 patients in the waiting room. "He told you they were for me. You never saw me. You never filed them under my name. You never created an official record of a prescription to Eleanor Sterling." I paused. "Which means you participated in medicating someone who never consented to be medicated. And I have the records." His hands were shaking. Mine were not. "I'll need an affidavit," I said. "Today. Signed. Confirming the prescription origin and the treatment timeline. My lawyer will draft it." "I could lose my license," he whispered. "You should have thought about that," I said, "before you wrote the prescription." He signed it in 32 minutes. I was back in my car by 10:15 a.m. when my phone rang. Julian's school number. I answered on the second ring. The school secretary, a woman named Mrs. Flores, whom I had known for 2 years, who always had a spare snack in her desk for children who forgot lunch, sounded strained. "Mrs. Sterling, I wanted to let you know, your husband is here. He's at the front desk. He's asking to update the emergency contacts," and she lowered her voice. "He's brought someone with him. He's asking to remove your name." I looked at the clock on my dashboard. 10:17 a.m. The spring recital was the following evening. The annual event that every family in Julian and Chloe's social circle attended. 100 parents, many of them connected to Sterling Vanguard through business or social ties. Richard had chosen this moment, and this audience, deliberately. He wanted to establish the new reality publicly. Vanessa as the woman on his arm. Me as the instability he'd overcome. My name removed from documents. A performance of normalcy built on the ruins of mine. Fine. He wanted an audience. I'd give him one. I called Marcus Webb, corporate attorney, 26 years practicing, the man Harrison had retained when he first began planning this, and gave him 30 minutes. He called back with a name and an address. A judge's clerk who had a window at noon for an emergency filing. Then I went to Harrison's. I showered. I put on the red blazer I'd had since my consulting days. Structured, sharp, the exact red of something that means business. I put on the stilettos, the lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I didn't look pale. I didn't look soft. I looked like Eleanor Marsh, who had once been too smart to be fooled by the obvious things. I had been fooled. But the fog was gone, and I was back, and I had everything I needed. I drove to the school. The hallway outside the main office had that particular school smell. Floor polish, crayons, something cooking in the cafeteria 2 corridors away. The bulletin boards were covered in spring recital artwork, Julian's painted sun among them, crooked and bright. Richard was at the front desk, leaning over the counter with his finger on a clipboard, talking to Mrs. Flores in the low, assured voice he used when he expected compliance. Vanessa stood beside him, camel coat, same as the morning she'd come to my house. She had the posture of someone who has already been told she's won and is waiting for the ceremony. "Eleanor is not in a stable condition to be a point of emergency contact," Richard was saying. "Vanessa is the appropriate contact going forward. If you need documentation from—" "Actually, Richard," he turned. The clipboard stayed on the counter. He turned and he looked at me, and all the color left his face so completely and so fast that it was almost anatomically interesting. The tan he'd cultivated in the Caribbean in February, he'd told me it was a work conference, drained from his cheeks like water from a glass. I stood in the middle of that hallway in the red blazer and the stilettos, with my eyes completely clear and my hands completely still, and I let him look. "You look," he started. "Sober," I said pleasantly. "Funny what happens when you stop taking the vitamins your husband poisons you with." Vanessa made a small sound. She stepped back 1/2 step, which told me she knew. She had always known. That was going to matter later. Richard dropped his voice. He stepped toward me. "You don't have anything. No money, no lawyers, no credibility. I will bury you before the month is out." I laughed. It was a beautiful sound. I didn't know I still had it. I reached into my bag and I pulled out the legal folio that Marcus had handed me 30 minutes earlier at the courthouse steps, still warm from the printer. I pressed it against Richard's chest and let him take it. "Check the corporate filings," I said, quietly enough that it was intimate, quietly enough that it was personal. "Yesterday afternoon at 2:47 p.m. I married your father." He looked at me. I held his gaze. "Which means," I continued, and now I was not quiet. Now my voice was pitched for every parent in that hallway, every teacher in the surrounding classrooms, every person within the range of a moment that Richard had designed to humiliate me in public. I now hold, through marital community property rights, voting authority over 51% of Sterling Vanguard. He looked down at the folio. His hands were shaking. He saw Harrison's signature. He saw the corporate seal Marcus had included, the one from the emergency board notification filed that morning. He saw the date. He saw the timestamp. He saw his own name in the ownership transfer clause. "I own your company, Richard." The clipboard hit the floor. His phone rang in his jacket pocket. He didn't answer it. He stood in the hallway of his children's school, with his mistress 2 steps behind him, and the wife he had poisoned standing in front of him in the red blazer, and he didn't answer his phone, and he didn't speak, and the color didn't come back to his face. The board had gotten the notification. The weeks that followed were a different kind of chaos, the kind that moves through lawyers' offices and boardrooms rather than kitchens and school hallways, which somehow makes it easier to bear. Cleaner, less intimate. Detective Karen Lowe, 12 years in the Boston PD Financial Crimes Unit, opened a criminal investigation into Richard's pharmaceutical scheme within 72 hours of receiving Daniel Reyes's compiled evidence package, the pharmacy records, Dr. Carmichael's affidavit, Dr. Hart's toxicology report, and the printed notes from the lockbox with Richard's handwriting confirmed by a forensic document examiner named Walter Cruz, who had 30 years of experience and whose testimony had never once been successfully challenged in court. Dr. Carmichael voluntarily surrendered his license pending review. He cooperated fully. I didn't ask for that, but I also didn't resist it. The board of Sterling Vanguard convened an emergency meeting. Harrison attended. I attended, seated beside him, legally present as his spouse, legally entitled to the floor. Richard did not attend. He sent Prescott Haynes, his corporate attorney, who arrived looking like a man who had been handed a brief he understood was unwinnable and had decided to perform dignity in the loss. Richard was removed from operational management within the week. Not fired. That would require a drawn-out board process, but suspended with pay, pending the criminal investigation. His access to company systems was revoked at 9 a.m. on a Friday, which I know because Harrison texted me a single word at that time. Done. The custody hearing was 8 weeks later. Family Court Judge Patricia Owens, 20 years on the bench, had my toxicology report as Exhibit A, Dr. Carmichael's affidavit as Exhibit B, Dr. Hart's expert statement as Exhibit C, and Detective Lowe's investigative report as Exhibit D. She also had 12 months of Richard's social documentation campaign, the teacher contacts, the neighbor conversations, the record of a systematic effort to establish my instability, reframed in Marcus's filing as evidence of premeditation and deliberate character destruction. Richard's attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantially assembled and motivated by marital breakdown. Judge Owens looked at him over her glasses for a moment. Then she awarded me full primary custody of Julian and Chloe, with supervised visitation for Richard, pending the outcome of the criminal case. She also issued a formal finding that the evidence of instability Richard had assembled was inadmissible, having been constructed under false pretenses. The court, she said, and her voice carried the specific weight of someone who means every word, does not look favorably on the weaponization of manufactured vulnerability. Vanessa, it emerged, had known about the supplements from the beginning. She had not administered them, but she had known, and she had said nothing, and she had moved into my home. Her cooperation agreement with Detective Lowe's office came with conditions attached. I don't know all of them. I know she is no longer in Boston. Richard was charged with criminal poisoning and fraud. The specific charges took 4 months to finalize. While the forensic accountants finished reviewing what he'd been doing with the company funds on the side, there were other things in those records. There are always other things. His criminal proceeding is ongoing. I won't be in that courtroom except as a witness. I have other things to attend to. It is now 11 months since the night I drove through a storm to knock on a door I wasn't sure would open. I live in Harrison's Concord house with Julian and Chloe, which is a strange arrangement that I will not try to normalize for you, because it is genuinely strange, and Harrison would be the first to say so. It is not a love story. It is something rarer and harder to name. Two people who made a decision based on a shared understanding of what was at stake, and who have kept their word to each other completely. Julian is in 3rd grade. He is currently obsessed with volcanoes. Chloe has filled 4 drawing notebooks since November and is requesting a 5th, horse-themed if possible. They sleep in rooms with windows that face the garden, and they wake up knowing where they are. Harrison and I have dinner most evenings. We play chess on Sundays. He taught me something I didn't know before, that you can build a life with someone based on mutual respect and a shared project without it needing to resemble anything you were taught a life should look like. It is quiet. It is solid. It is, in its own surprising way, enough. I returned to consulting in February, part-time, from home, a client I'd kept loosely in touch with during the fog years who was quietly delighted to have me back. The clarity of my own thinking still occasionally startles me. I'll work through a financial model in 40 minutes that would have taken me 3 hours 2 years ago, and I'll sit back and understand all over again what was stolen, what the fog cost, what I spent 5 years without. The anger has mostly given way to something else now. Not forgiveness. I'm not there, and I may not get there, and that is acceptable. Something more like clarity. The understanding that the worst thing that was done to me could not, in the end, take the things that mattered. My children, my mind, the version of myself that color-coded grocery lists and read contracts before signing and thought she was too smart to be fooled. She was fooled. She got back up anyway. Richard's trial date is set for September. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Meredith Johansson, tells me the evidence is substantial. I believe her. I helped compile it. The last time I saw Richard was in the corridor outside the family court hearing. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was the same height, the same build. Smaller in the way people get when the architecture of their own deception collapses and they have to stand unsupported for the first time. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. I thought about all the mornings I woke up in the fog and reached for the pill bottle on the nightstand and swallowed what he gave me because I loved him and I trusted him and I believed that people who hold your face gently in their hands do not do harm with those same hands. I thought about Julian's expression in the kitchen doorway, the morning everything ended. I thought about the grinding of the garbage disposal, eating those little white capsules into nothing. Then I walked past him to where Julian and Chloe were waiting with my father-in-law, both of them holding drawings they'd done at the kids' corner in the waiting room. Julian's a volcano, naturally, and Chloe's a horse standing in a field of approximate flowers. And I took a drawing in each hand and walked out the courthouse doors into a day that was sharp sharp and bright, and entirely, completely mine.